Hey guys, good morning. This is Ravindra Kataria, an ex-soldier from Indian Army. Like all soldiers all over the world, we are trying to analyze how Russians are operating in Ukraine. I would also be sharing my view how Russians are operating after studying a little bit on this. I'm not a Russian specialist, but generally have used their equipment, so a certain amount of information which is at the back of my mind, I'll share it with you. So initially, basically, I'll be covering it in three major parts, and today you'll be seeing the first part. And first thing will be Russian aim and military scope. I'll restrict myself to the military nature of war rather than getting into too much of economics and politics of it. Though there will be certain amount of overlap, which is you know natural. In the second, then we will be seeing Ukrainian capabilities, which is very important for a soldier to understand how the opposing side is equipped and how the opposing side was ready to get into this war, and then looking at the Russian operations. Now, these three parts may not be contiguous, they are overlapping. So I'll just go across on the slides and try and tell you how it is going to be done. So, firstly, in my view, there is an effort by Russians to create a Russian pro zone east of Dnipro, extending south and then creating a zone along the Baltic coast, which will help them, preventing incursions and attack on the Russian-speaking areas of Crimea, Luhansk, and Donetsk. And this will be coterminous with having a buffer with NATO. So Russia here, in this aim, is trying to use the Russian population, which is in majority in these areas, to create a buffer for itself. And this has to be a pro-Russian buffer. Then they will be able to take on NATO. Now, why this aim has come into being is I had written in 2020 January about the security of the world, and in which I had mentioned the top security agenda for 2020 was US Russia strains, or basically NATO and Russia, and this was to be led by UK. So now the strained relationships at that time have converted into a war now because of the effect of COVID. During COVID times, China, which used to be playing a very hidden card or was not that open about confrontation with the West, now is an open, and which has given Russia a fulcrum to try and use it to wage a war in Ukraine. Earlier, it was supposed to have been Russia versus Ukraine strained relationship. Accordingly, a military scope of operations to achieve above aim is to first to weaken the military infrastructure of Ukraine to an extent that no longer poses risks to Russian interest in the region. And secondly, capturing or threatening key population area, aiding in the political aim of crippling a change of the leadership, as also economic aim of crippling the economy of Ukraine so that its dependence on Russia continues. Now, we can see how Russia has reorganized itself after 2008 and has divided itself into four theater commands based on the districts: the eastern, central, western, and southern. Now, again, there is a fifth strategic command which is based on fleet, has been created in St. Petersburg based on the northern fleet, which is purely more of maritime strategic command, having certain amount of land elements with it. Earlier, the operations of Russians used to be at the division level. Now it is at battle group, brigade level battle groups. And there is a reduction of manpower in the overall Russian army from 1.2 to 1 million now, as also the number of officers has reduced from 355 to 220. Now you can see the Russians have transformed their contractual army to mostly conscription based now, which is having a big effect on its operational capability. With conscription based, there are problems which comes in because these are for short period conscription and their ability to actually have the professionalism is much limited. Now let's see. I have just lifted one slide from uh, the US paper, which is giving how Russians will be operating this area. What it discusses is how the Russian army or Russian armed forces have changed their way they used to operate before 1990, that is during Soviet times, which had a deep penetration philosophy along with an all-out war as the philosophy. Now the philosophy of Russians is limited wars with limited objectives and mostly non-linear because it understands its capability vis-a-vis West is very limited in terms of waging a all-out war. And the focus has slowly shifted on achieving surprise, creating conditions in the neighboring countries with pro-Russian sentiments, inserting certain amounts of special troops as also informants into the other country who help during the initial success of operations. It has clearly said that it will be using nuclear deterrence because of its weakness. So earlier, the nuclear deterrence was not having that kind of an importance. Of course, it had an importance, but majorly Russia used to depend on its conventional forces fighting, taking uh, taking on the West. But now they will be using the nuclear deterrence, which you can see has already been, within the first day of operations, Putin announced if anybody who interferes from outside Ukraine, there will be a nuclear retaliation. Then Russians have been known to attack in depth, which they have achieved. They have attacked Ukraine from three directions, and the objective is reasonably in depth, which is Kiev. They reduce reaction and switching of forces. Which they have done from and have attacked in broad front. Even when the main direction is three, from the three directions, but within those three directions they have attacked in broad front. So concentration of force, which is the basic principle of war, has not been kept into view. So therefore, you will always find in these kind of operations, the Russians' initial success will be there, but slowly the ability for Russia to continue exploiting that success is limited because of its inability to have a concentration of force. Now, as I understand, and as we can make out, basically the operations have been led from north by Western Strategic Command, by the Central Strategic Command in the east, and by Southern Strategic Command in the in south. We will see these commands as we go ahead. The naval effort has been beefed by the Northern Fleet, which is in the Baltic. Russians have similar experience of Russians have had these experiences in Chechnya and Georgia, as also to a great extent in Syria, and where they have fought battles in some form or the other, especially in built-up areas, and they understand the longevity of operations, and accordingly they are ready for it. What they had not envisaged in a big way was the reaction of West, which and the popular reaction in the West. It is the popularity of the reaction from the West which is of concern to Russia at the moment. As usual, uh, Russians have led their operations by airborne special forces, trying to create an airhead right next to Kiev, exploit the initial success by having a link up force which did link up from the north. And since the force is largely conscript, as I have already said, there has been a you can see there is a usual problem of poor equipment maintenance and unorganized movement, which has plagued Russians historically, and you can see it has not been even sorted out now. As also one can see, the ability of Russian soldiers once after the initial operations by special forces is limited because they are unaware about the war fighting. They have limited experience in war fighting. This has been a problem with Russia all the time. The, as we can see, uh, Russia basically in the first stage they have tried to destroy the military installation in and create a psychological paralysis of the country so that it can immediately, in the initial stages only win the war. But psychological paralysis has not found successful because of good leadership in Ukraine, as also very good uh, Americans and West's system of preparing Ukraine for this war, which has resulted into Ukrainians today, average Ukrainians standing up and fighting. In the second stage, they are going for the selective destruction of logistics and communications by using firepower and isolation of nodes and strong points and population areas. See, psychological paralysis, the moment it is not successful, they have gone for the second kind of an operation for isolation. And the third stage, which is investment and tightening of nodes with capture of areas for launch pads, is already going on. They have carried out wrecking force in the built up areas in a big way all over. However, those wrecking force and their ability to actually create these launch pads for the built up area has not been largely successful as of now. But don't expect Russians to back out. They will continue to do it, and in the long run, they are going to be successful. Now it is a game of military, politico, and economics to work out which way it will work out. Now, when we see any operations, we must understand how Ukraine geography is and how a military mind would work about this geography. So you can see it is mostly plains. The mechanized operation is suitable for mechanized operations. The country is kind of having four river obstacles, which are north to south, impeding movement from east to west or west to east. The Since it is largely plain except for certain some eastern Carpathian mountains in the west, for which some amount of mountain brigades have been organized by Ukrainians, mostly rolling hills in the east, then lowlands, and then again uplands of Ukraine. In the south, you see Baltic Sea and Sea of Azov, with Crimea, which is in hands of Russia. In the east, also, certain amount of area was already with Russia. Most important point I would like to point here is there are a large number of built-up areas which can be converted into strong points, which have been done by Ukrainians. How the mechanized forces and the mobile forces of Ukraine are deployed and how their overall structure of army. So basically, again, they have divided their uh, country in four military districts and each having its own theater command kind of a thing with integrated all arm support, mostly based on mechanized elements with some amount of armor which is operating in the east and north. Now they have a certain good amount of force to defend their country. Since 2014, Ukraine has undergone a tremendous amount of change as far as military is concerned, which we will see in the next slide. So basically, as you can see, there are mechanized elements. There is a proper RT support available to the three brigades in each sector. There is good air defense arrangement. There is excellent engineer support. They have also specialized elements for nuclear and biological warfare, which was not apparent earlier, even to the extent they have created mountain brigades for the west. So Ukraine is not only focusing on the east, you can see it is also equally focusing on the west. So Ukraine as a country is trying to rebuild its military, what it had inherited just after the breakup of Soviet Union, where Ukraine, after Russia, and probably was more endured than Russia in the initial stages, just after breakup of Soviet Union. During Soviet time, Ukraine was in the show window in the sense that it was in proximity as a Russian land, in proximity to rest of Europe, and had the best military infrastructure. And especially in the eastern side of Ukraine, where Russian people were there, they were Russian people were there, and accordingly, the population was more militaristic in its nature, which is now seen in the war. Going into the detail of the thing, We can see about 2 to 3 mechanized divisions which Ukraine has got, which is organized in brigade level uh, battle groups. There are 4 Army Aviation Brigades, 2 Mountain Brigades, 1 Jaeger Mech Infantry Brigade, which is operating north of Kiev in that forested area. Then there are strategic reserves with 3 tank brigades, 5 Mech brigades, 1 RT brigade, and 1 President's Bodyguard battalion. Now, as you can see, each area has got its component of mechanized elements. Each area is basically held by large number of or 25 nodes or strong points of territorial defense people, which is composed of 46,000 National Guards and 42,000 border guards. These border guards, in most of the cases, have fallen back to these strong points, are now defending them very strongly. Apart from that, there are 10,200 civilian defense personnel who are supposed to be the support elements. There is a large military police contingent. And on top of that, large number of training institutes are there, so which shows that Ukraine has been actually doing very well to try and make a military. So after it has lost its nuclear weapons post in the Soviet era, post-Soviet era, they are now trying to reinforce their military. In the initial stages, till 2014, it was not emphasized so much. But after 2014, with the Western aid and the amount of money, if you remember, uh, during the Trump era, there was a problem of Trump withholding aid to Ukraine to the tune of about $400 million. So the kind of money which has been pouring from Americans has created a warlike situation in Ukraine. There is no doubt about it. Now they also have good engineer support system with 2 engineer brigades and 1 brigade strength about for allied engineering tasks like road rebuilding and recreating infrastructure. They also have certain amount of capability of labs and all for nuclear biological warfare. Numerous military hospitals have been created with allied medical services spread all over the country. So from in this presentation, basically I really wanted to point out how Russians are going to be operating in the larger framework. In the larger framework, how is Ukrainian forces organize itself? So when President Zelensky says, "I am ready to stand and fight," he means it for the simple reason he knows they are very well prepared for a protracted war with Russia.